Hi everyone, I hope you are doing well. My name is Kate and I am new to YouTube vlogging. In one of his videos 5 or 6 years ago, Dr. Brown mused about the difference between collecting, using, and accumulating fountain pens, and a month ago or two, some other fountain pen and ink YouTubers started a conversation about collecting versus using, and that conversation spawned the hashtag 8pen questions that several people in the fountain pen, ink, and journaling community have been answering, and these were based on a discussion between Leanne Likes and Simona. I'd like to thank all of those folks like Chris Sands, Amanda, Miss Marilyn Darling, and the others who shared their backgrounds about pens and inks. And if I can get my voice to hold out, I'll offer up my answer to those questions too. So question number 1, when and how did your fountain pen journey begin? For me, my fountain pen use isn't a journey. Using fountain pens has been part of my life ever since I was a child. I went to Catholic school as a kid, and the nuns required us to use a fountain pen when we were taught cursive writing beginning in the 2nd grade. That was a markedly different experience from all the neighborhood kids I grew up with, because they went to the local public schools and didn't get introduced to cursive writing until 3rd grade, and then they used only ballpoint pens. We used Schaefer student pens, the demonstrators with the colored transparent barrel and silver cap. The best we could hope for in the Catholic school was to choose from blue, red, green, or clear barrels. Although our desks were from the turn of the century, equipped with a hole at the upper right-hand corner for an ink jar, we had to use cartridges in our pens as they were deemed less messy than bottles of ink. Part of our school supplies for the year was a blotter, a pen, a pack of cartridges, and the ubiquitous Ticonderoga No. 2 yellow pencil. My parents and grandparents, of course, used fountain pens since they grew up using them, so fountain pens have always been a natural part of my handwriting experience. I continued to use fountain pens throughout K-12, my college years, and after, and I've always preferred the way that they write. For me, there is a more intimate connection to the paper and to the text that I produce when I use a fountain pen as opposed to when I use a ballpoint pen. And I guess in a deeper sort of way, I feel a connection to previous generations of my family and to people in the past more generally when I use a fountain pen. I can easily imagine my immigrant great-grandparents writing home to family members they left behind in Europe at the turn of the 20th century, as well as my paternal grandfather who immigrated to the U.S. from Canada in the 1930s. I also imagine my maternal grandfather writing letters home when he served in the Marines during World War II, and how important those letters were to my mother's family. Writing has always been a significant part of my identity, and while I was never a diarist or one who kept a journal on a regular basis, since having a significant health issue last summer with long-standing complications, I've begun journaling to work through both the anxiety and the uncertainty, as well as physical pain that I am now faced with. In the same way that running or knitting or meditating or other types of calming activities can help to facilitate a state of tranquility, if only temporarily, writing with a pen that has some lovely feedback using a pretty ink on paper that enables those qualities of both the nib and the ink to shine through can sometimes be transcendent. Number 2, what were your favorite inks in the beginning, and what are your go-to inks now? Well, in the beginning, as a 7-year-old, I didn't have much choice. Ink color and type were dictated by the nuns. Black ink always. I think that is partially the reason why I never buy black ink and haven't used black fountain pen ink since I was in elementary school. For the most part, I've always used cartridges if the pen allows it, and often my pen purchasing choices are informed by the pen's ability to use a cartridge. I used only Schaefer fountain pens until the late 1990s, so I was limited to the Schaefer script colors. I bought Schaefer's Peacock Blue, which is a very beautiful turquoise that is no longer available, though their new formula does include a color named turquoise that is not similar to the old formula, and I also used Schaefer Classic Brown. When I finally started buying bottled inks that I could load into cartridges using a syringe, I began with Nagasawa Kobe, Pilot Iroshizuku, Bungu Box, Ackerman, Diamine, and Robert Oster inks. I bought most of the Japanese inks from vendors in Japan who were willing to ship to the U.S., and the Bungu Box, Ackerman, Diamine, and Oster inks I got from Van Ness back when Van Ness still carried Bungu Box. Nowadays I tend to gravitate towards Japanese and South Korean inks, though I still have several Diamine and Robert Oster inks in my stash. I have more Sailor and Pilot inks than any other brand. However, I do actively search out lesser-known Asian inks more often than not. Question number 3. How have your ink and pen tastes changed over time? I would guess that my tastes haven't changed that much, but what has changed is not being restricted to pens and inks that are available in the U.S. market. I do not hesitate to purchase from overseas, and I've purchased a lot of inks and some pens from Australia, Europe, and Japan. In terms of ink, I have always been drawn to bold colors, especially those that were not really mainstream back in the day when the norm was to use basic black, basic blue, or a blue-black ink. Color is an extraordinarily important part of my life, and I really like jewel-toned autumnal colors, especially greens, and especially those scummy pond greens, browns, and cool purples. I like wet inks that flow easily through the feed. I am sort of an anomaly in that I love to use fountain pens and gel pens on index cards and, of all things, paper towels. Some of you are bound to gasp at this revelation, but I love how ink feathers, sort of like watercolors on wet paper. So I am very unlike many fountain pen users who prefer to use highly coated paper like Rhodia and its parent company's slightly different type of Clairefontaine paper. Likewise, though I have a lot of different types of paper in my stationery stash because I am first and foremost a paper collector, I don't reach for Midori or Cosmo Air Light when writing for personal reasons. I don't like that coated feeling on paper. So my diary or my journal is really made of paper that's more absorbent. I don't mind Tomoe River paper because it doesn't tend to have that super coated feeling to it, but I look for papers that aren't so smooth and that help my sailor nibs sing. Papers that absorb the inks are more than the so-called fountain pen friendly stock are the types of papers that I prefer. The Schaefer pens I grew up using mainly had steel nibs, so I am used to writing with a fairly stiff nib, even with the vintage Schaefer pens that have gold nibs that I own. But in reality, all of my Schaefers are vintage because all except one pen were manufactured by Schaefer before the 2000s. This desire to use stiff or hard nibs translates to my preference for sailor pens. I especially love the hard sailor nibs. I love the feedback and the way they sing when I write with them. You knitters out there who use Signature Arts airplane grade aluminum knitting needles know what I mean. The metal of those needles makes a distinct noise when you knit with them, especially the DPNs, and I call that noise humming or singing. The feedback of the sailor nibs on some unsmooth paper helps the nibs to sing too, and this adds to that sort of transcendental feeling I get when journaling. I still have a huge number of gel pens, micron pens, mechanical pencils, and a few Parker jotters for check signing, so I don't limit myself to one type of writing instrument. But mostly, when I'm writing just for personal pleasure, I'm using a fountain pen. Question number 4. Are there inks and pens that you have yet to try but would like to? I tend to be pretty open to trying new inks, especially if in colors I am drawn to. I don't, however, like dry inks or really pale inks, and I am especially not enamored with the few shimmer inks that I fell under the spell of. I really dislike inks that are hard to deal with, that misbehave, that are either slow drying, that tend to gunk up a feed and nib, or those that stain, and especially I don't like those that leave glitter on my hands. I like green and brown inks, so I am baffled by the fact that I still don't own the most famous brown ink out there, the infamous brown ink by none other than Dr. Brown himself. One of these days I'm going to rectify that somewhat long-standing oversight. I can't think of any pens that I would really be compelled to try that I don't already own. Question number 5. What is your grail pen? Well, I'm not hunting for religious artifacts, so I'm not in the market for grail objects. If I consider a grail pen to be the one that was not on my radar and was no longer in production, so chances of owning it were slim, I'd have to say that I was extraordinarily lucky, and I am indeed indebted to Matt Armstrong of the Pen Habit, in that because of him, I found and obtained what I consider my grail pen. As I previously mentioned, I grew up using Sheaffer pens, and back in January 2017, I saw Matt's October 2016 YouTube review of the Sheaffer Legacy 2 pen that by then was out of production by the early 2000s. I knew by his writing sample alone that that was the pen for me, especially if I could score one in the coppery finish. But I didn't see that video until January, and Van Ness was unfortunately sold out of the copper finishes in their stash of new old stock. But they had a few of the palladium cap and barrel model 863s left, and I bought one of those. For me, it is the most exquisite writer that I own. It's lush, wet, juicy, all of the superlatives that I can think of for a pen that lays down an incredibly beautiful line of ink. The fact that it is a stunning 18-karat inlaid nib doesn't hurt, and almost paradoxically, it is the smoothest, quietest writing nib I own. It's even smoother than my medium-nibbed Pilot Elite 95S's and the broad Decimos. Honestly, that pen is as smooth as melting butter. It's quite an experience to write with one. There are a couple of Sailor Pro Gear Slims and Pilot Decimos that are stationery store collaborations made for the Japanese market that I surely wish I could have gotten my hands on, like the blue-green Kobe Gradation Pilot Decimo, or the orange Pilot Decimo, or the iris flower, or ruby pink, or sunrise orange, or any of the other sparkling pink demonstrator Sailor Pro Gears or Sailor Pro Gear Slims. But most of those, as far as I know, have been sold out everywhere. There are 2 Mont Blanc pens that I would like to try. The Patron of Art Homage to Victoria, a limited edition 4810, and the Princess Grace de Monaco. And while the $3,400 price tag for the Victoria is identified on the Mont Blanc's website, the fact that one must contact the concierge to find out the price for the Princess Grace lets me know that these 2 pens are beyond the price range of what I am willing to pay for a pen. Question number 6. How many pens do you currently own? 71. Question number 7. Do you have a limit on pens or inks in your collection? Is it a number, a feeling? When do you know you have reached your maximum number of pens or inks? No, I guess I don't have a limit on either. Earlier this year, I thought I had gotten to the point where I felt that I wasn't going to purchase any more pens, but then the Grape TWSBI Mini came along. That particular shade of purple is one that really speaks to me, just like the TWSBI Eco Transparent Purple spoke to me. So like with the Eco, I caved in and got the Mini. With inks, I guess my limit would be based on what I can practically store. I've just moved into my 5th Times Fragrance 9-inch by 12-inch shipping box. That's Time, THYMES. These boxes are very convenient to use for for ink storage because they are really sturdy and they have a lid type opening. They also smell fabulous from the fragrance of the soaps, creams, or candles that I purchase. I keep a small unopened Fraser Fir candle in one of the boxes so that I can smell the scent of Christmas anytime I open my Sailor ink box stash. I prefer to keep my inks out of the light in a box that can be closed so that the sunlight doesn't degrade the inks, rather than displaying them out on a desk. 8. What would you do if another pen or ink came along? If it spoke to me, barring cost prohibitions, I'd probably buy it.